Hey folks, Rick Mackey here. Just coming on again tonight to cover another new topic on our Mind, Body, and Spirit series, if you will. Tonight we want to talk about, this is something that keeps coming up in my different sessions with people in the life coaching that I do, that I've been doing for the last few years. It's called repeating and lingering negative patterns and what we can do about it. So I wanted to first make the announcement that if folks come in to the chat to actually look at the post in social media and click if you're in Facebook, click the link so that you can so I can see who I'm talking to there when you come through. Also, there's a link in there if you want to join the show and join in the discussion at any time during the show. I will decide to bring you in at some point. So without further ado, I'd like to go over some of the things I'd like to talk about here about this lingering negative patterns that we have. Usually when we think about negative patterns, we're talking about things like addiction, all different types of addiction. It could be sexual addiction, could be food addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, whatever. They're all kind of similarly related when it comes to psychology. So some of the things I want to talk about is the pain that we experience when we can't break out of those patterns. We get into the self-judgment, self-loathing, the guilt, the shame, lack of self-worth, all those things. And then maybe get into, what could be behind some of the forms of addiction that we have and that people have, and what to do about it, and some of the intentional ways to fight the addiction and negative patterns in our lives. What role mental illness might play in your own personal negative patterns in order to heal things like anxiety and depression. Sometimes we need to seek help from others, like therapy and guidance from books or personal counseling or whatever. So we'll try to go step by step here. And I wanted to show a couple of initial videos on the topic and then kind of talk through them as we go. So let's start off with this one. Effects. So a lot of if we go back to what I was saying about self-judgment, self-loathing, guilt, shame, those kind of things, a lot of that, the core of negative patterns or addiction, oftentimes if we look back, there's something traumatic that's happened in our childhood, whether that be sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect. Just pure abandonment can cause problems like that, like these dysfunctional patterns we end up with in life if we generally have normal psychology, like we're not sociopathic, we're not psychopathic, those kind of advanced personalities. So whenever I'm talking on here, really not going to address those more complex things. I'm talking about more day-to-day, everyday people that have had traumatic things happen to them that we need to address. So let's start off with this video here. I'll switch over to the browser. Make sure I got that set properly. Okay. Now let's start off with this to kick the discussion off. This one's going to be the effects of childhood sexual abuse on the victims.
Well, one thing that a lot of people don't realize is when our children are abused, whether it's sexually, physically, emotionally, those scars stay with children, in essence, sometimes for a lifetime. And then it manifests itself in underperforming children in school. They potentially act out and may get involved with law enforcement and other problems. And then they lose hope in their life.
I think back now, and again, she destroyed me, period, emotionally. She took the me out of me.
I think it's a struggle for children, and I think it goes on through most of their lives for many of them, especially if they don't get treatment.
Many children, go down a path, or adults go down a path of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, promiscuity, prostitution. It runs the gamut. You can act in or you can act out, and so there are real life-threatening consequences from being a victim of sexual assault.
I ended up rebelling. I would fight everybody. I was always angry. I was a very, very angry person. And that led me to go to juvenile.
One of the things I do struggle with all the time is weight. There was a time about 15 or so years ago that I actually lost a lot of weight and got down to close to what the weight charts say my weight should be. And it was terrifying because, once the weight was off, people started being more flirtatious towards me. I started seeing myself as more of a sexual being, and immediately the weight came back on. So, there are things that you constantly deal with.
The cost, not only to the victim, but the families, is so great. It's not just the victim who suffers, while they do suffer the greatest amount. There's other siblings, parents, who now have to go down a spiral of, did I do enough? Why wasn't I there?
When Anthony realized that this had such an effect on his life, it affected me in a way that I did a terrible job as a mother in that area. And that's something that it's just hard to accept. I'm sorry that I trusted her the way I did, and I'm sorry that I didn't know more.
And when you're seeking to recover from the sexual abuse, what you're trying to do is get your ability to trust back.
Yeah, so that's a good intro into that particular topic, and how later on in life that has a profound effect on your own personal behavior and negative patterns. And then the next, so that was, straight up abuse, right? Sexual abuse. And I think they did mention abandonment in there in one spot, but I wanted to kind of follow up with this video here with the abandonment type. It's even though it's not necessarily like a physical or sexual abuse, the abandonment thing can really cause just as drastic mental deficit, if you will, in a person. So let's watch this one real quick.
When we deal with abandonment wounds, oftentimes those wounds trigger us to seek the approval of an archetype we didn't previously get approval from. An example of that would be promiscuity. So there might be a history where they got a lot of, say, male attention, and this male attention made them feel really good, and they figured out that by being more sexy or more forward or just letting people have their way with their bodies, that they were never going to be alone. They feel this overwhelming emptiness inside, and so they keep finding new partners to kind of try to meet that need with. But of course, when you share your body and you give away something so special and precious to someone who doesn't see it that way, what you really do is actually traumatize yourself even more, because now the subconscious communication in that is that, yeah, you really weren't special to this person either, but they enjoyed you for what you gave them, but you didn't matter. When we deal with...
Wow. Yeah, it's pretty deep. So then, what's this one here? Okay, so then we bring it from the sexual and the abuse side to the abandonment and neglect side, and then the next form of addiction would be like food addiction, right? So what I'm trying to do is kind of show the correlation between all these things, right? All these different types of bad negative patterns or dysfunctions that people have in their lives. If there is some kind of a connection usually between something that's happened, a deep experience that's happened in their childhood. So let's go to this one here.
That a large population in the Kaiser Permanente system. Kaiser Permanente is a big insurer and health provider in the States. They looked at 17,000 or 14 to 17,000 adults, and they elicited a history of childhood, and they found there were 10 categories of childhood adverse experience, and they were, if I can remember them all, physical or sexual or emotional abuse, neglect, a parent dying, a parent being jailed, violence in the family, a parent being addicted, a divorce, addiction in the family, mental illness in one of the parents. For each of these adverse childhood experiences, the risk of obesity goes up exponentially. Not just the risk of obesity, by the way, also the risk of addiction in general, including substance use, injection use, and so on. Also the risk of autoimmune disease, such as rheumatoid arthritis, such as scleroderma, such as multiple sclerosis. Also the risk of cancer goes up. So, in other words, the eating problems seem to be on a spectrum of responses to trauma somehow, and falling under the general rubric of addiction. Now, here's what's interesting. This information has been out for years. There's been dozens more studies showing exactly the same thing all over the place. A year ago, and don't forget, this is published, this study was done in the Kaiser Permanente system. So a year ago, this spring, I was invited to go to California, which is where these studies originate from. Felitti lives in San Diego. I was invited to go to speak to a number of Kaiser Permanente clinicians about addiction. And a month or two before the event, they phoned me and said, well, could you suggest some literature we could read on addiction? I said, surely you've heard of the adverse childhood experiences studies. Oh no, what are those? And when I actually spoke to these clinicians, half of them had heard of it, which is pretty good. Yeah. But it also shows the tremendous resistance to this kind of information.
Right, that's what makes it difficult for us to seek help, actually, sometimes, because a lot of the times these deeper issues are, because they're in the past, they're not taken seriously, sometimes by certain professionals. And then the last one here I wanted to cover is drug abuse causes, signs and symptoms, diagnosis and treatment. But I'm just going to cover this one little section here.
Change in the brain that it is so challenging for an addicted person to stop taking drugs. Like many mental disorders, drug abuse has no single cause. Many factors may contribute to the development of drug addiction. The main factors are genetics, environmental factors, such as parental abuse or neglect, family beliefs, exposure to peer groups that encourages drug abuse. Other factors that may affect the likelihood and speed of developing a substance addiction may include psychological problems, such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, as well as personality disorders. Peer pressure, early use of drugs, unstable home environment, poor relationship with parents, inadequate supervision over adolescence activities, poor achievement in school.
Well, there you go. So, I mean, these are kind of like common sense things that most people could probably figure out, but what I'm trying to do is point to the fact that all addiction pretty much stems from the same kinds of psychological experiences and dysfunctions. So with the negative patterns that people just can't seem to get themselves out of. Like, they keep going back to the same patterns of resistance. Like, they're resisting the act of healing by continually going back and forth with whatever addiction it is that they have, whether that be sexual, drugs, or whatever. They'll just keep going back because they're not healing that inner problem, that deeper issue that they need to address, that they keep ignoring time and time again. So what we need to do then is to dig into the root of this continually choosing negative patterns, such as addictive behavior. And some of the examples would be sex addiction, as we just discussed, pornography, multiple partners and making excuses for that behavior, lack of commitment to one person sexually when trying to be in a monogamous relationship. People oftentimes will reach back for negative patterns of the past, such as low moral standards, using sexual prowess as a tool for gratification, seeking. Now, a lot of people will say, well, is it the point of this life to seek out joy and happiness in life? But a lot of times people, they mix up this idea that sex is the thing that will make you happy, or the gratification of being high or something like that is what they're seeking to feel happy. What they're really doing is stuffing the true feelings down and not addressing them. So they're basically masking the pain of this unresolved trauma in a lot of ways. So this idea of seeking joy in life is not the same thing as self-gratification, right? So seeking joy to a person, as far as relationships are concerned, might be that they want to have one person to spend the rest of their life with. Maybe they'll have a strong sexual or physical relationship with each other as an expressed form of love. And then others will just use sex as a form of controlling other people, controlling their own feelings, masking problems, and just pure self-gratification, selfishness in some cases, when a person is being promiscuous. That can lead to a lot of guilt and shame for people. So, but not all people feel the same about monogamy. I get that. So, I mean, there's a lot of people who don't choose to be monogamous. They choose to live a lifestyle that's totally different. But in my personal experience, most of those people end up having all kinds of problems with, jealousy, anger, instability, and just more negative patterns, really, with those kinds of behaviors. When there's a lack of moral structure, or there's a lack of sort of control over your impulses. And that can be as big as the sexual addiction or the drugs and food addiction, like where people become 600 to 800 pounds in size, and anything can be taken to an extreme and it can kill you. Now, we look at things like TV and entertainment and sports and music and all these things as ways to escape from our own reality and to kind of numb ourselves out, or to put everything out of our mind for just a temporary moment. But if you're addicted to those things and you're using that as a form of sort of zoning out and not dealing with your problems, then that's just as bad as anything else, right? That can be just as damaging, because that leads to other things, right? The avoidance behavior leads to other dysfunctions and negative patterns in our lives. So the whole idea of Netflix and chill constantly is not a good idea. Not that we don't have our breaks and enjoy those things once in a while, but everything has to have balance, right? When it comes to, if you think about everything being mind, body, and spirit in balance, you can't just take any one thing and focus all your attention on it and then make it an addiction or a dependency in some way. And it can lead to forms of like this unresolved trauma that we kind of leave festering there can lead to things like self-harm practices. Like a lot of times people will do things to themselves and harm themselves and take risky behavior, like, doing things that could cause like near-death experiences, like extreme sports, for example. I'm not saying people that are thrill-seeking all have trauma. That's not necessarily true. But I'm saying probably there's many cases, there's a lot of trauma behind their behaviors to risk things like that on a regular basis. And then there's the people who have to have constant attention from the opposite sex, or just attention in general. They have to be the center of attention no matter what. And that can be another form of addiction where you only have self-worth unless you have all the attention on you. Now, we just showed a few examples of what could be behind some of the addiction there, which, like the sexual abuse and the physical abuse, the neglect, all those things. And what are some of the ways in which we can fight those things? We have to think about maybe taking a change in lifestyle, being more aware of the things that we have left to deal with that we're not addressing within ourselves, and taking an intentional focus on those things and trying to actually heal them. Now that means we have to focus on learning how to forgive, right? Now that's a really tough thing to try and do sometimes. Hold on, I'm checking the stream at the moment. I got a couple folks in, so let's see. Yeah, okay, so if anybody's here, they want to pipe up and join in or throw something in the chat, that would be great. Anyway, I have to keep an eye on that. So, intentional ways to fight addiction or negative patterns. So, what are some of the things that people can do? Are you seeking out medication? All that tends to do is numb out the same problems in a lot of ways. Ultimately, if you're just taking medicine and covering it up that way, it's really no different than the addiction itself eventually. How can that bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to go? Absolutely, and it does for a lot of people, but there has to be a means to an end with that sort of thing. You have to be able to say, all right, well, I'm doing this now, but am I truly healing that inner wound, that thing that I carry with me that causes the addiction to begin with? So you have to be honest with yourself. Do you know how to forgive? Do you know how to let go of the pain? And forgiveness, again, I've talked about this in the last session that I did. Forgiveness doesn't mean we forget or that we condone the behavior. It's just a sort of form of letting go and realizing the humanity in people and the imperfectness of this world, and the reason that we're here is to learn. So if you bring it back to purpose, that's, again, where you got to go. And but to take an active role in your own healing means, you go and you get your counseling. You might participate in cognitive behavioral therapy where they teach you how to be mindful of these feelings that you have and the need to have to snuff it out with, or numb it out with substances. And so this might require a pretty significant lifestyle change on your part. You know, that could be looking at everything, all of the habits that you have, all of the behaviors, all of the negative patterns, writing them down, analyzing them, and looking to see where, you know, where you are now, how you feel now, where you want to be. That could mean like changing from being more sedentary to getting more exercise, changing your diet, practicing mindfulness, meditation, seeking a higher power through a religious or spiritual practice. Those are all important things. I mean, the spiritual aspect of it is probably the first and foremost thing that I would think that people need to focus on, is that you have to have this idea that you've come here for a purpose, that you're not just supposed to be here wasting away. And with all the bad things that happen to us in this world, if we just let it fester and never address it, then all you're doing is numbing your whole life away. You're spending your whole life totally covering up whatever it is that is causing you pain. And you're self-destructing. And I hate to say it, a lot of people think, well, the most important thing is my spiritual beliefs, you know, or a lot of people will focus on the religious beliefs, not necessarily the philosophy behind it. They're focusing on all of the rules that they have to follow so that they can feel like they're living in a way that will almost give them permission to continue the way that they are, you know, their own self-destructive behavior in other ways. So it's sort of, how do I say it? It's counterproductive to get involved in religion as a way to justify your negative patterns. Like, you know, I'll just be forgiven for it. Instead of realizing if you don't change those negative patterns, your life is probably going to be over anyway. Because you can't drink for too long and not have it affect you. You can't overeat and not take care of yourself and not exercise and not do some of these things and expect to have longevity and not have complications with health, right? I mean, I'm talking the majority here. I'm not talking that in every case, like even a healthiest person can come down with cancer. But what I'm saying is the majority of people who are healthy are the ones who have a mindful approach to their life, where they're looking at the big picture and seeing where all of the areas of dysfunction and negative patterns are, and then addressing each one of them. So when you seek a higher power, you need to seek it from the aspect of not justifying or just getting the forgiveness part of it, but doing your part in your own healing and realizing that God is the guide, and God put us here for these experiences so that we can learn to heal. And we can teach other people to heal too. Once we've, you know, if you look at it from that aspect, if I heal myself, I can heal others as being an example of positivity. So then, what are some of the other ways that we can sort of connect with God or connect with a higher power and get some guidance? That's get out in nature, you know, spend some time in this place that God has created for us to live. Appreciate the beauty of nature and the fact that it pretty much takes care of itself, even with all the bad things we do to it. Nature has an amazing way, and the earth has an amazing way of recuperating itself, even with all the bad things we do. Not that we don't want to try to do what we can to appreciate the earth and making sure that we're doing our part. But yeah, it's like, connecting with that creation is so important. Now, not everyone has access to, getting out in nature necessarily if you live in the inner cities and you don't have the funds or whatever to get yourself out. But even if you're just getting down to Central Park in New York or whatever little spot that you can find, whatever little place that you can stick your head out the window and see nature or wildlife or birds or whatever you can do to connect with things that are not man-made, you'll find that God speaks to us through those things. Even if it's just going and observing people at the mall, you just like sitting at the mall and you're observing the behavior of people and just kind of appreciating the connections that families have with one another and all those little things that makes you realize that that's the whole point of being here, is the structure of love and the application of it in the family is such an important thing. And and those who didn't get that growing up, it's really, really hard for them, to pull themselves out of the misery as an adult. So, yeah. So then we focus on building new and more positive patterns in our lives through, like I said, exercise, diet, personal intention to seek things that make you happy, new hobbies, finding ways to give back in society through volunteer work or social programs or whatever. It's like there's all these different ways that you can, more positive ways that you can distract yourself from the negative things that have happened to you in the past. I don't think that there's enough programs out there for us. Like, I feel like society has sort of dropped this idea of having a lot of volunteer opportunities, in the communities. And that's one of the things I'd like to see more in my own community, actually. Or maybe I just don't know where those things are accessible. And I think through churches, sometimes you find a lot of that. And it's just a matter of doing a little bit of research. And then if there isn't enough of that in your area, then start something. See if you can get something going. Just connect with the right people and see if you can make a difference in that area. So being of service is really a big, big part of healing, I believe. Looking at everything you do, whether it's your job or whatever, as a form of service. And it will change your life. And then there's the mental illness aspect of it. They were talking about one of the videos, bipolar disorder, which can bring about some of these negative patterns and negative experiences. And there's a whole spectrum of antisocial behaviors too, and then there's autism and different things like that people really need to seek professional help on, or just, you don't even need to go and sit with a therapist necessarily. There's a lot of people who write books, and the best of the best of the best write some amazing books, some best-selling authors out there. And you just got to do a little bit of research and find out, first of all, maybe get a diagnosis for yourself and find out if there is any sort of, physiological or genetic component to what's happening to you. And then start from there, and then dig into the past issues, the things that might be holding you back because of trauma from childhood. Or it doesn't even have to be childhood. It can be young adulthood, or it can be any aspect or a point in your life where you've experienced abuse, PTSD, physical abuse, sexual abuse. That happens sometimes. You go your whole life without anything. You get into a relationship and all of a sudden, bam, it just, you're surprised by it. And then that brings on negative patterns and self-destructive behavior. But a lot of the time, the deep self-destructive behavior, the ones that stick with people, that's hard for them to get out of, happens in childhood. So if something happens to you as an adult, you can almost get out of it easier because it was one incident. And generally you won't want to repeat that pattern, right? If it happens as an adult. But if it starts when you're in your childhood or in your early teens and those years there, it's harder to sort of get out of the negative mindset. So there's the medicine approach to all of these things to help you bridge that gap between where you are and where you want to go as a tool to assist you. But the bottom line is you have to do that inner work of forgiveness and, self-care. And it's so important. And then the next step, if you wanted to research herbal supplements and things like that to kind of help you bridge that gap too, there's a lot of alternatives there as well. For anxiety, you can use like magnesium, L-tryptophan, theanine, kava, valerian root, chamomile, lavender. There's all kinds of different herbal remedies, if you will, that will help you along with some of the things to address anxiety. And then you have depression, which can be treated with 5-HTP or St. John's wort, omega-3 fatty acids. There's all different types of things that you can try. And what I suggest people to do is to start with one thing, try it for a while, see if it works, and then kind of mix it up a little bit, because a lot of the herbal remedies will their effectiveness will start to lessen. And then you also have to look at the side effects, the potential side effects of some of these things, because some of them still will affect your liver like the drugs will, or your kidneys or whatever. So you want to look at the side effects of some of these things if you're taking long term instead of taking as needed. Same thing with drugs. You got to look at what the side effects are, what your risks are. So all things you should discuss with a professional when it comes to that. I think, I'm not really sure if an osteopath gets into herbals or not, but I know they do more natural. They kind of do integrated medicine a lot of the times. So you might look into something like that. Or a nutritionist would probably be more apt to talk to you about herbals and things like that. So a big part of the healing aspect is building a new support system, right? Like coming up with, they were talking about in one of the videos how important environment, how your environment growing up had an impact on your negative experiences, right? But as an adult, we have a little bit more control, hopefully a lot more control over our environments, over the people we surround ourselves with, our ability to build new support systems. Sometimes that means starting completely from scratch and removing anyone or anything that's ultimately holding you back or otherwise influencing certain negative patterns. If you have, let's say you're an alcoholic and you know you don't want to drink, but all the people you hang out with are also alcoholics, or they're extremely heavy drinkers. And sometimes that's just going to mean making some tough decisions on who you surround yourself with and the type of environment that you want moving forward for yourself. That can be in and of itself probably one of the worst or most difficult things to do. I know a guy who just had to do that in his life. He just decided, I'm just going to eliminate anybody who has a negative influence over me, who doesn't understand the importance of where I want to go. And I can't be around this environment or this substance and remain healthy and happy. So they have to cut out all their the friends that they had, some family members, and live a little bit more lenient when it comes to, for a little while, until they built up new friends and things like that. So it took a little bit of time, but they landed on their feet really strongly, and still to this day they're completely sober and not drinking. So it's amazing to see when people are able to do that, and that's self-love. That's an act of self-love and intention right there. Yeah, and if you can't go to parties and be around that sort of thing, then maybe that's, at least for now, that's something you try to avoid. Or you go, like if it's a family thing, it's a picnic, people are drinking, whatever, you just go, you spend some time, and then you have to leave. When things, feel like they're getting out of control, or they're getting to a point where it's becoming enticing or really hard to resist. I think over time, that gets easier, and the more that you practice sobriety and avoiding the things that are negative in your life, it won't be as hard in the future to be around those things. And then you have the sexual promiscuity subject, where your friends might be a big part of the pickup scene and the clubbing and all that kind of stuff, and you realize, well, I may have to make changes there again. I might have to change the type of people I hang out with on a regular basis, and change the environment that I'm in, and not do those things as much, or to do them at all. Sometimes you have to cut it out completely so that you can survive, so that you can change the behavior that's not working so well for you in your life. Sorry, I'm reading something here too. At the same time, trying to come up with a little bit more deeper discussion there. But let's take an example of somebody who is trying to make the switch from a promiscuous lifestyle to being more monogamous. And for whatever reason, they still hold on to this need for attention from the opposite sex, and they just can't simply let go of their friends, and they just are not able to do it, and they keep trying with relationships, and nothing ever works out because they keep going back to the old behaviors. That's the one thing I kind of don't understand. It's like people want change, but they can't just make the tough decisions and stick to them. So I've never really been addicted to anything necessarily, so I kind of don't have the personal experience, but I've studied enough to know that people can break out of those patterns if they want to. It ultimately comes down to an individual choice. It comes down to making the hard decisions in your life that will lead you on the path that you want to be. Now, you're either going to make those tough decisions and have some success, and it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be really hard to break through any of the addictions that you might have. But if you keep your eye on the prize, you have an idea of where you want to go in life. What's beyond all of that for you, right? Ask yourself that question. If you don't have an answer to that question, then the chances are you don't have a reason to give any of those things up, because it's easier to just keep the pain. It's easier to just numb out from the pain through all of those addictions, and to never address it, and to let your body and your physical self basically deteriorate at an early age. And it's really sad to see people do that. When I was a personal trainer years ago, I was dealing with a lot of that kind of stuff. I felt like I was more of a counselor than an actual trainer. I felt like I did more one-on-one counseling with people, just kind of dealing with their problems and digging deep on that inner child or whatever. And it's really funny because that wasn't the focus of what I was supposed to be doing. But in order to have success, I had to some extent, I had to address those issues, or at least point them in the right direction to say, hey, the reason you're not able to give up the food or the extra, the abuse of the food is because you have some deep-rooted problem that you're dealing with, that you're not really being honest with yourself on. And I would encourage them to go, have that looked at and to dig deep on it, and maybe give them a couple of books to read on the subject. And the ones that took my advice were successful. The ones that didn't were, stuck in the same negative patterns, and some of them for their whole lives. And that's their choice. That's every individual has a choice on how they want to live their life. You want to live it healed. You want to at least live it seeking to be healed, right? We're not necessarily going to be 100% on anything, right? But if at least you're seeking it and your intention is to be healed, and you're doing your best to get there, and you're not beating yourself up when you fall back, that's the big thing right there, right? So if every single time you mess up and you go back to something, you think, all that work that I did for the last 6 months, let's say you stopped drinking for 6 months, and then all of a sudden you fell off the wagon one night because you had a really high depressive instance, something big happened in your life, and you just gave in for that one moment. If you're able to pull yourself out of it, don't hold it against yourself. Don't let that say to you that you're a failure, because it doesn't negate all of the good work you did up to that point. That was a weak moment. We're all human. We all have our problems, right? And we all have our weak moments where we go back into bad behaviors or negative behaviors or whatever. We pick up that ice cream cone when we really shouldn't be doing that, because we're feeling depressed or we're not feeling so good, and we get into a negative pattern for a while. And that's okay. You just, as long as your intention is to pull yourself out of it and you realize, hey, I'm doing my best every single day, then that's all anyone can ever ask. So yeah. So the goal is to learn self-love, figure out what's your why for healing. Why do I want to heal? What do you think you're going to get out of this healing journey, right? Where are you headed? Where do you want to be in life? Where could you be without those distractions, without those deep distractions, without the need for escape every single night, I've known people who were just coming home every single night, getting stoned, sitting on the couch, vegging out on the TV, and just totally wasting all of their evening hours doing nothing. They're living their whole lives in a miserable job. They're not happy with their work, not happy with their life, just coming home, doing whatever behavior they would do. Either it was drinking, smoking pot, whatever. Just staying totally zoned out and never addressing anything. And all it took was a person to point it out to them, to say, hey, do you realize you're unhappy with your life, yet you're not doing anything about it? You're just kind of zoning out. And sometimes people don't even realize the patterns they've gotten themselves into, like how bad it's gotten for them, until someone has enough guts to point it out and say, hey, you're self-destructing over here, and I care about you. And that's what we need to do more of. We need to do more compassionate, constructive criticism, not destructive criticism where you're like, oh, you're just a drunk or whatever. You're calling a person a name, right? You don't want to do that. You just want to, love and support people through their issues so that they can get to the point of healing that trauma, that inner trauma. So that was a lot. There's a lot with this topic where, you know, you could pick any one of those things and dig deeply in them, and not every person, you can't like put a label on a person and say it's this specific thing. But at the root of all those problems, 99.9% of the time, seems to be, in my experience, in my research, some kind of trauma from childhood. And it, like I said, it doesn't have to be the really bad stuff. It can be just a parent who never showed love, for example, to a child. You know, I've seen and heard and discussed that with people where, you know, their own parents never even gave them any attention that way, never told them that they loved them. That was like they were at a burden for, maybe they had children late in life and they weren't happy about it or something, and they were treated like they were a burden their whole life. So they grow up seeking approval from everybody. You know, like that's the most important thing, that they get approval from others instead of being, you know, focusing on just being the best person that they can be. Now, and sometimes they'll turn to manipulative tactics, and you know, becomes a mental illness for them and becomes unhealthy. The seeking of approval, it can lead to promiscuity and other problems. So yeah, so we'll have more of this kind of discussion, but I want to try to get, you know, this going to a point where I actually have people that can come in and we can have like a back and forth discussion, because a lot of this stuff is hard to convey unless there is sort of a use case to go by, you know, where we're discussing it. So, you know, like, what is your experience? Let's talk about that, right? And sorry, I'm just going through some of the notes here just to see what else we could talk about before we hang up here. But again, like I said, I'm just going to be going through and trying to find topics to discuss. And with a little more engagement, we can dig deeper on any one of these points in the future. But for now, I think we'll call it a night, and we'll go from there for the next one. So I hope everyone's having a good night and a good holiday weekend. I figured I'd pop in for a little bit and kind of cover another topic here. So have a good night, everyone.